Heroin is such a huge problem right now that it has now become the #1 drug threat in the entire state.
Big. It's everywhere. Everybody I talk to.
This may be the first year that we write the word heroin on more death certificates than we write the word homicide.
It is massive. 50% of the deaths are in the suburb. 45% of the deaths are girls.
It's everywhere. It's a plague.
I live out in Olmsted Falls, too, so it's not a Cleveland thing. It's not a white thing, black thing.
The more money you have, the more you can buy.
I come from a great family. I had a good job. I went to good schools.
My son's face is now the new face of heroin.
The heroin problem has quadrupled in the last 13 years.
Absolutely, it is a killer. It's killed lots of my friends.
And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to stop. You buy it off the streets, $10, $15, and you're high.
Heroin has become a party drug. I don't know how that happened.
Human beings have been trying to change the way they feel with chemicals, I think ever since we've been on the planet.
Heroin. It's an ancient drug that gained fame as a killer of celebrities. But there are thousands of others who aren't famous, and they're dying too at an alarming rate. Addicts come in all ages and races. They're poor, they're rich, they're middle class. They live in suburbs, cities, even Ohio's farmland. Opiate overdoses now surpass fatal car accidents in Ohio. Last year in Cuyahoga County, it killed 161 people, mostly in the suburbs. Why should you care? Because if you don't know an addict by now, chances are you will. You may become a victim of crime to feed someone's habit. Regardless, your tax dollars are being spent on a war we're currently losing. Drug cartels are here, but the first dealer is the medicine cabinet, where legal prescription drugs first get abused. Once the opiate addiction takes hold, heroin is cheaper, faster, and easier to find on the street. I'm Monica Robbins. In the next hour, we're going to take you inside this complicated underground world that's affecting us all.
It killed John Belushi. It will kill you too.
This drug is an equal opportunity destroyer. It's in the best suburbs here in the state of Ohio, and it's in some of the most challenged communities here in Ohio.
This is something that affects you no matter where you live, no matter what race you are, no matter how old or how young you are, and that's basically what makes it an epidemic.
I was about 16 when I first started snorting heroin. I started shooting up at about 18.
I started using heroin when I was 49 years old.
It's epidemic. I'm in my 41st year of law enforcement currently, and I have never seen it this bad.
Your son or daughter didn't get introduced to drugs by a drug dealer. They got introduced by your next door neighbor.
80% of kids in particular are getting prescription drugs from friends and family.
The kids have those, what they call them, Skittle parties, where they take the bowls of just mixing pills. That leads to death.
30% of 12th graders have used a prescription drug not prescribed for them. And of that number, 19% have no idea what they took.
Almost everybody that I used with started on prescription painkillers.
And then a friend, the term friend, introduced them to something else, whether it be pills, heroin, crack cocaine.
So kids that have started out abusing painkillers like the Vicodins or Percocets or OxyContin, oxycodone, they switch to heroin because it's cheaper and it's more available. So what used to be a drug that you think only the hardcore addicts get to, that's not the case anymore.
Opiates are prescription heroin. Heroin provides the same type of high, is much cheaper to get, and you don't necessarily risk the wrath of mom and dad finding out that you raided their medicine cabinet.
The medical examiner looked at data from 2006 to 2012 and basically found a 77% increase in deaths in the city of Cleveland, but a 176% increase in deaths in the suburbs.
So why can't they just quit?
If you want to be trapped forever, try heroin, because you're done. It's got a hold of you and it's not going to let go.
The pills are beans and buttons. The Visine or the iMix is monkey juice.
Smack, dog food, boy.
Dog food, Aunt Hazel.
H, fire, They're not going to say, you know, the word heroin over the phone.
Death could come in a little bag like this. This is a stamp bag that a user would buy on the street. It's about 15 bucks for 1/10 of a gram of heroin, about the size of your fingernail. So what is this drug they call dog food? What's it look like? And how does it get here? And are kids really using needles to shoot it?
So heroin was developed in the late 1800s by a pharmaceutical company called Bayer. It was supposed to be a pain reliever like Bayer aspirin or whatever. Heroin got to the street because as an opiate, it had such a high degree of potency that pretty quickly people preferred it to morphine. And the company realized it was going to be very hard to sell it safely, so they tried to pull it off the market. But it's so close to morphine as a substance that it just immediately went to the black market.
Heroin comes from the pod of the poppy plant before it blooms, like this one. Our heroin is coming from poppies grown in Afghanistan. The pod is scored with a very sharp knife, and the gum that oozes out is dried, processed, and turned into pure, deadly heroin.
This is the exact size of a kilogram. It would be, for those on the American system, it'd be about 2.2 pounds. And this would come in, it would be made in a lab somewhere in Mexico and compressed. If you feel it, they call it a brick, and it really is as hard as a brick. I mean, it's a very hard substance. This kilogram of heroin on the streets of Cleveland would cost you somewhere between $65,000 to $85,000 for this 1 kilogram. So if you do the math, the dealer gets this heroin at that type of purity, breaks it down, cuts it with a whole host of things.
They could cut it with basically anything, and a lot of it could be deadly. Rat poison.
They can take this kilogram and maybe make as many as 8 to 9, selling it on the street for as much as $150 a gram.
So what am I looking at?
This was purchased in Cleveland. This is what they call a stamp bag. They would put a piece in there, which could be up to a gram. It'd be $100 to $125 per gram. They're claiming the purity levels are very, very high.
What's in this bag?
Stamps. These are a little bit larger than stamps. This has skeleton heads on it. So they'll take these small stamps, wrap 10 of them up, and wrap them in the rubber band, and that makes it easy to exchange. Very small in your hand, very easily exchanged back and forth on a hand-to-hand transaction. You know, paraphernalia stores and head shops, you can purchase them. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 packets. A dealer could get, literally could probably get $700 plus for what's here. The most popular Percocet right now is what they call the 10 325 milligram.
Heroin bound for Northeast Ohio typically comes from Afghanistan, across the Mexican border, and through big cities like Chicago. Sometimes it's sent by mail, or sometimes by person.
It comes in via a process we call body carry. They're called heroin fingers. They're really about as big as my thumb lengthwise and maybe twice the size around. It's nothing to have seen this in someone's rectal area, or somebody swallows it, or women put it in another area. It's usually wrapped in a condom or in a balloon. And this has been in somebody's body for 48 to 72 hours until it crosses the border from Mexico into the United States and then into the hands of a dealer somewhere.
We have 22 active drug cartels working the state of Ohio. And what's scary is they're now starting to work down to 7th and 8th graders.
Plenty of guys that are hooking up over Facebook.
These traffickers will deliver to the western suburbs for a cost of gas money similar to someone delivering pizzas.
It's nothing for a carload of kids to ride from the suburbs, good communities, Independence, Seven Hills, Parma, pool their money together, buy a bunch of heroin, take it back to the suburbs, and then sell it for more than what they bought it for in the city.
The youngest heroin users I've seen are 11 and 12. The average age, though, is probably closer to 17.
34. I'm 36 now. I started this when I was 27, as I started the heroin when I was 27.
Yes, people have used heroin in many different ways that all try to get the heroin absorbed quicker without necessarily using a needle and running the risk of HIV or hepatitis C.
I snorted. That's it.
I didn't start sniffing. I mean, I went right for the needle.
They do it in their wrists. They'll do it in their feet.
On first look, it just looked like I worked hard. But these are all track marks in my hands.
We've also heard it can be laced into a cigarette or marijuana joint.
So if you hear the terms buttons or beans, that's heroin in pill form. The other one is now something called monkey juice, and they're taking liquid heroin and mixing it with Visine or other saline-based eye drops. And 2 drops in the eye, and you get rapid absorption through the eye membrane. and it's an instantaneous high, or they're using it like nasal spray.
Today's addict has choices. Heroin comes in pills and eye drops. It can be smoked or snorted, but old school is still the fastest guaranteed high, the needle and the spoon, mixed with bottled water and filtered with cotton balls, Q-tips, or cigarette filters. But no matter how it's used, addiction is practically guaranteed.
Multiple times a day I'd wake up and use. It was all I could think about. I did anything and everything to get high. I didn't sleep ever. That's all I did until I got caught.
If you just had enough willpower, you just bite down on a piece of leather and you could just stop.
It was like just this warm feeling that went over my body, and it made me feel good.
I never wanted to be a junkie or a drug addict, you know, and got caught up.
I knew that I did have an addictive personality, and I still chose to do it almost to see like what it was like.
And they just say that it's just so euphoric that it's like none other.
Any drug that is abusable causes an extreme release of the chemical dopamine in levels in your brain that are anywhere between double or 10 times the normal limits. And that's what makes a drug so seductive or so addictive. So depending on what drug you use, how young you were when you started it, do you have a family history of the illness, those are some of the things that give us hints or clues that maybe that person will develop addiction later on in life.
About 15% of Ohioans have a brain that has addiction in it, about 15%. So for those people, if they use heroin, they may well be addicted after the first time.
15% of Americans, that's about 1 in 8. Someone on your street or mine could be addicted. But what's it like to live that life? 2 women from successful families shared their stories with us. Judy wanted to remain anonymous so she doesn't jeopardize her job. Nicole is studying psychology and counseling so she can one day help others get through the hell she too experienced.
One night we snuck out and I got drunk and I was sexually abused by 2 older men that were at this party I was at.
After that, Judy struggled with self-esteem issues. She first became addicted to cocaine. Then one of her so-called friends introduced her to heroin.
I remember I asked if I was like, is it really something where, you know, if I do it one time, I'm gonna be addicted? No, like you'll be fine. You have to use for, you know, a few weeks in a row. And I remember like not even a minute after I got high, I like was thinking to myself how screwed I was because I knew that I loved it. It was like probably the best feeling I ever had in my life. And I knew that I wasn't gonna be able to stop as soon as I did it. And from that point on, I used every day until I got caught. I was stealing from people. I stole from people that I got really close to, friends. I pawned my own stuff. I had almost nothing left. I mean, I had nothing. I didn't get to the point of using myself to get drugs, but I mean, I could only imagine how much longer it would have been until that happened because it was suggested. At first, I wasn't staying clean for me, I was staying clean for my family. And now I'm doing it for me because I realize I can have a better life and I can feel better, and I'm starting to feel better about myself. I wouldn't say there was a direct trauma in my life. It was just high school. I mean, my parents were normal parents. I went to church every weekend with my family. My uncle's a minister. So it can happen to any family. There's girls that, you know, they say mean girls in school, and if you don't fit in, you either go, you know, one way or another, and I just chose that path. And it started off with simple little things such as like Percocet and, you know, some Vicodin every once in a while. And then it just led to bigger and bigger things, eventually snorting the pills. Once I started shooting up, it was over. I got in trouble for running somebody off the road because they stole from me. And it was just, I was hanging out with just, you know, terrible people giving me terrible advice. I ended up, like I said, losing custody, and that was a, you know, shock to me because I love my child. Everything was just bad. Nothing was good, and it was no more happy, no more fun. You know, it was like chasing, like instead of just, oh, we'll go get high today, it was, you know, I have to get high today. I'm sick, I don't feel good. So I read this book called Heroin Diaries by Nikki Sixx. I had put down the needle and I hadn't used ever since. I went and did everything I needed to do. I went to parenting classes, I went to anger management, I went to rehab, I
did hair tests so that way they could check and make sure that I was clean. I don't regret everything I did because it's shaped who I am today, and I'm able to help other people who struggle with this addiction, but I wouldn't want myself to suffer also, because I've walked that fine line so close to death so many times that, you know, I could have died, and that's a scary thought, because now I've got 4 children and they need me.
To get clean, both women had to fight the physical addiction and the brain addiction.
I still remember what that felt like. Just as much as it is a body addiction heroin turns into, it's a mind thing too, where you know that you liked it and you know that it made you feel better.
Addiction is a brain disease at its heart. And the brain part that's affected in addiction is what we call the reward pathway. What happens is that drugs, alcohol, and tobacco hijack the reward system and make it difficult for the person, if not impossible, to control their use of that substance.
And there's a feeling that heroin user can just turn it off like a faucet, and I probably was guilty of that. 2 years ago, if you would have asked me that, I would have said, you know, why don't they just stop? But you get an appreciation after you sit here and you've seen and worked with folks. As much as you would hope they could stop, it's not as easy as it sounds. You know, this isn't like giving up chocolate.
Because heroin affects the body and brain, it's not easy to just quit. Judy and Nicole fight every day to stay clean. But not all addiction stories end well. Many die of overdose. And every junkie we talked to told us they live in heroin hell, and they took their families and friends down with them.
After a while, you know, parents wouldn't give me the money anymore. So you couldn't borrow any money from friends, you know, like you couldn't get any money from work. So you got to go out there. Well, what I did is I had to go out there and steal for it, and, you know, you had to take that chance of getting caught and going away.
You make really poor decisions and you end up hurting other people besides yourself.
I'm not free at all. I can't go 5 minutes in a day without thinking about it.
It took everything from me. Self-respect, morals, in and out of jail, unwanted pregnancies, my whole life.
You know, I've had friends that just died a month ago from it. I had to go to the funeral high because, you know, I couldn't even make it to it unless I was high, you know. So I'm talking to these family members that just lost their son, you know, from the direct use of it, and I'm over there, you know, going to their funeral high.
Junkies are slaves to their addiction. In order to keep chasing the high, they lie, they cheat, they steal, and often end up in jail. They destroy families and friends. It's a living hell.
That's one thing about this lifestyle is trying to figure out how you're gonna get it, and when you got it, how you're gonna get some more.
He pawned, God knows how much stuff.
When you get in the middle stage of heroin addiction, that's a full-time job. Your work is finding ways and means to get more drugs. Addiction causes you to develop all kinds of cognitive distortions. AA calls it stinking thinking. And so you've learned how to move from a life of integrity to duplicity. And if you've used long enough, not only does everyone else believe your lies, you started to believe your own lies.
And then there's the money. A dose of heroin can cost just $10 to $15 on the street. But if you've been addicted for a while and you need more, it can cost up to $150 or more a day.
Her and her boyfriend stole probably about $2,200 from me.
$1.5 million of my father's money, of my parents' money, and their life savings, plus my own money.
I used about $14,000 in 1 year.
They'll steal from parents, from family, from neighbors to support the habit. You get into prostitution. Substance abuse leads to an increase in domestic violence.
And yet sometimes jail is the only thing that can bring a family peace and help the addict.
Just about every time I arrested somebody for heroin and put them in our jail, either they'll say thank you that time or a couple of days later after they're off their dope.
Okay, Andrew, step back for me.
In prison I couldn't use. Wasn't killing myself. I was happy.
The only time I was able to sleep at night was when she was in jail.
It stretches your family from every corner. It's constant chaos.
My house was a circus, and I had 2 other children that I had to protect, and they had to see it all.
It will tear a family apart.
Cheryl knows too well the anguish a family suffers. Her daughter, Becca, tried alcohol and pot. Cheryl thought it was normal teenage experimentation. Then Becca tried heroin, and the addiction took its awful grip.
Becca progressed quickly. She started drinking, I caught her at 14, with a cousin on New Year's Eve. I actually started laughing that every kid experiments. Now I look back and I wish I had taken it a lot more serious, gave her more consequences, watched her closer. Before I knew it, she was into full-blown addiction. And at age 17, admitted she was into heroin. Couldn't have been my child, but it was. I realized that I was enabling her. I was still giving her money to go do things, and here she was using the money for drugs. We started a little support group of several moms. You can't do this alone.
Becca's in rehab now and trying to stay clean, but some stories have a different ending. 4 Ohioans are killed by this insidious drug every day. Many of them are young. That's when their moms and dads receive the most devastating news.
When you have to go and tell the family the worst news they could possibly ever get. We arrive, put your hat on. I don't know if it's perhaps a sign of respect. We're trying to buy that extra couple seconds before we walk up to the door. And the only words that I've ever been able to use at that point are, I'm sorry. It's happening too often.
No one wants that call, but the truth is heroin and opiate drugs are killers, whether it's a dose too big, a dose too pure, or one not pure enough. This is Dennis Michelson's door here at the Geauga County Safety Center. He's a drug counselor. When I first met him, this entire door was covered with obituaries of people who died from heroin overdose in Geauga County. Now there's too many to post. He just keeps the number. 58 so far. 4 have died since we started working on this program. So what happens when you overdose?
When heroin is injected, heroin is immediately transferred into morphine in the liver. Over time, that respiratory depressant will start to depress the cardiac and respiratory cycles. And patients become unconscious and can vomit and aspirate into their lungs and die.
There's a shocking secret about overdose. The addict is the least affected person. They feel nothing. So if they survive, they usually go right back to using.
One of the most exhilarating feelings for an addict is to overdose and survive. It's almost like, whoa, that was really something.
When he woke up from ODing, the first thing he said was, they killed my buzz. And he wanted to go get high again. I mean, that's how bad the addiction is.
The person can slip from being high to stopping breathing and being dead without a moment's notice.
Those fortunate enough to survive an overdose or never have one, the road to recovery is painful and long. Detox is the first stop. Those who've lived it say it's worse than the hell of addiction.
Every inch of your skin's crawling. You're hot 1 minute, then you're cold the next minute. It's worse than hell. It's worse than hell.
It's like having the flu times 1,000.
It's almost like you're cold and you're hot at the same time. You constantly feel nauseous, almost like you want to die.
I was lucky and I got here the day before I died.
Really sick, to the point where, you know, I'm sweating, I'm not sleeping.
Opiate withdrawal is filled with pain, filled with anxiety, filled with insomnia.
The pain and everything is so bad, it'd be easier to die.
Getting clean means detox. Many people detox in jail because they've been arrested, or they come to a hospital or institution like this one where they can get additional medical attention. This is Rosary Hall inside St. Vincent Charity Medical Center. It is one of the oldest alcohol and drug treatment programs in the country. No matter where detox happens, it is awful, and it is not the end of treatment, because addiction is a brain disease and can often be tied to underlying issues such as trauma and mental illness.
For many individuals that have experienced trauma, they resort to drugs and alcohol to either escape the pain or to just deal with the pain.
75% of them have significant past trauma I'm talking about genuine abuse. They've seen someone shot point blank. They've been raped. You're dealing with a legitimate case of PTSD.
It's the potholes in an addict's soul. The dope fills those potholes in very, 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 very well.
Many junkies who go through detox and treatment relapse.
They say relapse is a part of recovery, but we didn't know how big a part.
3-4 relapses is not uncommon.
50% of the people that complete a rehab program will still be sober 1 year later. And then 50% will have fallen backwards and perhaps started to use again. They are comparable to the statistics for diabetes, high blood pressure, and asthma. I look at it as a learning opportunity. What went wrong? What can we do better this time around?
What's more, relapse after detox can be deadly. Getting clean reboots the body and the brain. Most addicts return to their old dose, which they can no longer tolerate.
Their body has started to heal. Their brain has started to go back to what we call homeostasis, or a baseline. And it's almost like a shock.
Robbie Brandt was clean for almost 4 months before he relapsed and died.
10th grade, he got his wisdom teeth pulled, and he was given a full bottle of prescription drugs. I went back for the bottle, and I noticed the bottle was completely gone. And that raised a red flag right away. There were times when he was him, and then there were times when he was, angry or sleeping all the time. His grades would be up and down, but he did what he had to do, to hide his addiction. He did the outpatient rehab, and then he did the inpatient rehab, and he relapsed. And that was it. He didn't go a third time to rehab because he was headed off to boot camp. And he had gotten injured a couple of times in boot camp, and they gave him morphine. And when he got home from boot camp, he had rekindled a relationship with a friend that he used to buy and sell prescription drugs with. And that friend introduced him to heroin. I felt like he entered what I called heroin hell. I knew something wasn't right. I knew the money was missing. I knew pills were missing. I knew that cough medicine was missing, but you could never pinpoint that. With the heroin, that was easy. I definitely knew. I had missing cotton balls, and I thought, who is eating my cotton balls? Where are these cotton balls going? A $5 Burger King was a $20 debit card charge, and I started monitoring his bank account, and it's like, where's your money going? Spending a lot of time in the bathroom. I couldn't wake them up. They go on the nod when they use heroin. They just keep nodding their head and they just keep falling asleep.
One morning, Robbie left for work in the company truck, but he never showed up there. Rob and Carla knew something was wrong. They spent the night calling his cell phone and driving around East Cleveland, where Robbie had bought drugs before. The next morning, Rob reported his son missing.
And I was filling out the paperwork, and they got the call that they had found him. And he said, we're sorry to have to tell you. And you see it on TV all the time, and then it's real.
A heroin overdose killed Robbie Brandt in October 2011. 3 of the last 4 calls on his cell phone were to different drug counselors for help. Tragically, they never answered. The last call was to his dealer. Robbie had been clean for 110 days.
Where and how you get clean can be complicated and in some cases very expensive. In Northeast Ohio, there are different treatments, different methods, and different places, but still, most say it's not enough.
We are blessed with more drug and alcohol treatment facilities than almost any metropolitan area I know of, but we still don't have enough facilities. Once a person's done with detox, cravings kick in for heroin, and people begin to think about it and crave about it. During the day, at night, they dream about using it, and they wake up all feeling in withdrawal again. One of the ways to interrupt that pattern is to help a person with a 12-step recovery program where they substitute sober people for all the using people they used to be with. In addition to a recovery program, is to use a medication like Suboxone or naltrexone or methadone. Suboxone and methadone are very similar. They're both opiates. They satisfy the cravings, they block the withdrawal, and they buy the patient some time to work a recovery program.
Best way to kick the habit is to have an approach that looks at the biological, the psychological, the social, and the spiritual aspects of the illness. And so, in effect, you really want to be hitting on all cylinders.
They have got to commit in their heart that deep down inside they can do it. It's a rough road, but they've got to get over it if they want to live.
You can put any individual in any type of treatment program, one that is covered by the government or one that costs $50,000 a day. And whether that individual is ready to work the program is really a critical piece of how effective the program is.
If you follow a group of people with heroin addiction over time, at the end of 40 years, unfortunately, 60% of them are dead. So if you don't get sober, a lot of people die. But of the people that are still alive at the end of 40 years, the majority are sober.
That's the good news. Addicts recover and go on to lead productive lives. But everyone needs information and support. You know the saying, it takes a village.
We have to look out for each other's children. We have to be conscious of what's going on in households where our kids are, and then be brave enough to say, perhaps it is in my backyard.
Parents need to stop being so almost naive.
Everyone agrees the solution lies in collaboration to increase awareness and education. The City of Independence started a program called 25 and Alive. It's meant to help kids make good choices, and everyone is involved, from schools, parents, kids, churches, the city, and businesses. The most important thing any community can do is acknowledge the problem and attack it with teamwork.
It isn't just about expelling kids and having a zero tolerance policy. It's about inviting experts into the school.
And no age is too young to start the discussion.
I've had them say, without blinking their eyes, I started when I was 8 years old, 12 years old, 14 years old. With heroin, it's generally around 16 or so.
I would say 8, 9 years old.
In Ohio, the average first-time experience with pot is 12 years old, but we've got areas in Ohio where it's 9 years old.
At the elementary school level, kids are really attuned to what makes their body healthy and what makes their body sick.
Parents need to know their own child, the signs to watch out for, and be ready to be nosy.
You know your child when everything's good and fine, and if there's a problem, you look at your child and say, you're not yourself. What's going on? What's the problem?
I check their rooms, look at their phone, their Facebook account.
You own that house and you are liable for anything that goes on in that house. That's not their rooms, that's not their private property. You are there to protect them, not be their friend.
I mean, if my mom would have gone through my phone plenty of times, I would have probably been caught and done right there.
Sometimes the parents have more denial than the addict does, but don't protect them from the consequences.
Support them, love them, teach them, and don't give in.
And here's some stuff kids need to know.
What's your escape plan? So develop 3 phrases that you can use to get out of a situation so that when it happens, they're not overwhelmed by the situation. They've been through it, they've talked about it, they know the appropriate way to respond and react.
All of the recovering addicts we spoke to had dire warnings for kids. No surprise there. They all said, don't start, and then said things like this.
I always thought, like I was a cool kid doing the drugs and everything like that, and, but I realize now that the kids that were cool are ones that were sitting there doing their homework and actually, trying to make a career.
Absolutely don't do that, because once you do, there's no turning back. I ended up in jail. I have charges on my record that will never go away. I was young and dumb, basically, and it sucks because, we're going to school now, and I can't take any of that back.
It will ruin your life. If you don't end up in jail, you're gonna end up dead. You don't try heroin. It's not something that you do with your friends on the weekends. It's something that when you do it, you're done. Until somebody helps you, you can't help yourself.
And now we know the trouble can start at home with unused medicine.
The physician community has begun to get the message regarding the magnitude of the problem with prescription drug abuse. And as a consequence, they're prescribing less, which means there's less prescription opiates available, which means more people are turning to heroin.
Don't be an unintentional dealer. Get rid of your unused medicine, but don't flush it. Call your local law enforcement and ask about drug drop-offs. There are many steps we all need to take to get this deadly problem under control. If you or a friend needs help, tell someone. If you see something strange in your neighborhood, a suspected deal, a kid who may not be acting right, speak up. We're all part of this village.
You don't have to be a detective to know that something's not right in your neighborhood. If you see something that looks or appears it could be criminal activity, you're probably right.
Everything's changed. I'm working, I have a great job, I have friends.
I don't have the anger built up in me. I'm a nice person now. People like to be around me. I get along with people and I can help others.
The peace and the joy, just the fact that I can get up and appreciate life on life's terms.
Many of the addicts we spoke to are in recovery, and we may never know who's successful, but their honest and candid stories can still inspire hope.
The high is not worth it. You know, I don't get satisfaction out of thinking about that stuff anymore.
Right now, I feel happy. I'm content with how things are going. I'm working on, getting my life back, paying all my bills. So when I see people using, I want them to see that, I was doing that and I'm okay now and they can get better.
Meet Betsy. Like Nicole and Judy, she managed to climb out of addiction. She's been clean for 8 years now. But when her kids were teens, she used alcohol and drugs and then started with heroin when her husband asked her for a divorce.
I could not face my reality and I stepped into using heroin. That's when I started using heroin when I was 49 years old. I can't put a price on the pain that I caused my children. I was in the bathroom using heroin, shooting up, and I had not locked the door of the bathroom and my 15-year-old son walked in on me. He says, "Mom, you're not only killing yourself, you're killing us too. You have to do something." That made me realize many things, that I was the only thing they had. I didn't know about withdrawals and pain and that it was a disease of the mind and an obsession to the body. I can look back and see where I was.
Today, Betsy leads a full life, working at Rosary Hall, the place where she began her road to recovery.
The desire to stay clean is greater than the desire to use again.
You've met Cheryl. She's opening a 3-quarter house to help young women come back from addiction and reintegrate into society. It's named after her daughter's birthstone, Opal House.
When you take a gemstone out of the earth, it's dull, dirty, it's rough, much like someone with addiction who's out using. But as they start recovering and going through the recovering process, they start to shine. It is definitely here to save lives. Otherwise, these girls and these ladies would still be out on the street or in a bad situation. There's no time limit on how long they can stay here, as long as they're showing progression towards independence. They've had enough in the institutions. They need a home. This will be a safe, sober place for them to live clean with their peers. Everyone here will be going through the same thing.
And the Brants have picked up the pieces of their lives. They followed up on their son's dream to reach out to addicts and their families. They're now the voice he might have had.
A couple days after, I immediately went in his room and I started going through everything. I found a notebook and I opened it up and I started reading it. And it was a website that he had started and he wanted to help addicts. After his funeral, we both just looked at each other and we both just knew if Robbie wanted this, we're his voice now. We are Robbie's voice.
We started it really with a very simple goal, and that was to bring awareness and education to save lives. This is a life or death issue, and education and awareness is lacking. We've spoken to over 3,000 parents and kids in middle schools, in community centers, in high schools, in rehabs. We've got close to 800 Facebook friends now that follow us. You know, to be that resource for all the information we didn't have, all the things that we couldn't find, and to maintain that connectivity with people so that they're always updated, informed, and aware.
So that's the scary truth about heroin. The killer is everywhere, making people sick, causing crime, wrecking families, friendships, and communities, and burdening taxpayers. The solution is recognizing the problem and working together to fix it. We have a full list of resources on the WKYC.com website. You can also view complete versions of some of the stories you heard. I'm Monica Robbins. Thank you for watching, and please take these final hopeful thoughts with you.
For the person that's out there on the streets of Cleveland and elsewhere that's putting this poison out, targeting it to kids and doing the things that they're doing, I'm telling you that the United States Attorney's Office is going to do everything in its power to make sure that you never see the light of day.
I think the most important thing for all of us to keep in mind when we think about addiction and heroin addiction in Northeast Ohio is it's a huge problem. There's a lot of treatment available. Combining medicines with a recovery program helps, and no one should give up, because as long as a person's alive, there's a good chance of them getting sober.
Addiction is a brain disease. Addiction is very treatable. People do recover, and there is hope.
I do see the success stories, and that's what continues to drive me, that, you know, there is hope. You just got to keep at it.
Never, never, never give up hope. It may seem hopeless. It may seem like hope has abandoned you. There are people and places and things that want to help you.
This has been a special presentation of WKYC in partnership with the Lake Geauga Recovery Centers, the Cleveland Foundation, and Recovery Resources. Log on to WKYC.com to join our live web chat with a panel of experts on the problems of heroin and opiate abuse.